Hello, I'm Josh Hallam, and you are listening to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we celebrate films we think are underrated or underseen. This week, it's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Alice picked this one, so let's see what we think. Alice.
Yes, Josh.
We're going to talk about fear.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about loathing.
We are my two favourite topics.
We're going to talk about Las Vegas. Where's that rank in the...
Oh, that's pretty high. That's pretty high out
top
there
three,
too.
top three. Yes, we're talking about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas from 1998. So, spoiler warnings if you've not seen it. It's going to be an interesting one, I think, this one. Let's get stuck into it. So, Alice, first of all, if you can, tell everyone at home, what is it about? And then follow it up with, why did you pick it? Is it underseen? Is it underrated? Go.
So, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is a black comedy adventure adapted from Hunter S. Thompson's novel of the same name. So it follows the story of journalist Raoul Duke, played by Johnny Depp, and Dr. Gonzo, played by Benicio del Toro, as they travel to and around Las Vegas for what is meant to be a work assignment, but they end up just doing so many drugs and going on some seriously wild trips. That is essentially it. The reason that I picked it was similar to many of the films that we end up picking. Just started thinking about it one day, thought, I'll have a little look at the critical reception, saw what the critics gave it on Rotten Tomatoes, and thought, hang about, that feels a bit off for me, because I remembered when I saw this, I remember really liking it. I think I've seen it maybe 2 or 3 times, like not loads, but I remember enjoying it every time I saw it. I've also read the book, which I also enjoyed. So I thought it was, I feel like it's underrated. I feel like it's underrated.
Underrated then?
Yes,
underrated.
Indeed. I feel like as well, so some of the criticism that I saw around it said things like it's aimless, repetitive, and devoid of character development. And while some of that may be true, as we'll get into, I don't think that makes it a bad film. It was also a financial failure, making $10.6 million at the box office, where its budget was $18.5 million. So it didn't quite make its budget back, but it has become a little bit of a cult classic. So what about you, Josh? You said you think this is going to be an interesting one. So I'm interested to know why you think it's going to be an interesting one.
So, well, first off, I hadn't seen this.
No, I didn't think you had.
It had been on my list of films, as in not for the podcast, just the films I wanted to watch, my to watch list, if you like, for a little while. And I'd never got around to actually picking it.
Well, you're welcome. There
Thank you.
Go.
It was the sort of film where
this gift.
It's the sort of film where it's like, when am I ever going to be in the mood to pick this, I suppose?
You just fancy it. Yeah.
So anyway, I hadn't seen it before. So I was really glad you picked it, to be honest, because it was
awesome.
one I wanted to watch.
Interesting.
I knew it was a cult classic. I did know that. It's obviously been referenced in plenty of stuff over the years. I was quite trepidatious to watch this. I was quite nervous
big
because
words, Josh, big words.
Because I find Terry Gilliam, who directed it, a bit hit and miss. Obviously, he's most famous for probably being in Monty Python, and he directed some of those films, and I do like those. So I really like 12 Monkeys. I really like Time Bandits. But then, for example, his probably most successful film is Brazil. And I find that really tough watch. Like, I think it's quite overrated. So I was going into it like, what am I going to get here? And it's really difficult to sort of sum this one up for me. So I'm going to come to you first.
Okay.
I think you might have quite a bit to say about this, and I'm going to gauge what you say first.
Sure, yeah.
I'm going to gauge what you say first, especially because it's based on a book. So it's based on the Hunter S. Thompson book, and a lot of what I want to say, I'll come into it, is to do with that representation of the book. So I want to see what you say first. So, having rewatched it for the podcast, did it hold up? What did you like about it?
Yeah, it did hold up, really. I think there is a lot to like in there. I can certainly see the flaws with it, and like I said, I can see the points that the critics were making, but I do not agree that they made it a bad film or that they devalued the film in any way. So, if we're going to start from the top, as I like to do sometimes, I think it has one of my favorite, or one of the best opening lines of any film ever, which is, I believe, we were somewhere around Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs began to take hold. And I was just like, if you don't know what this film is going to be about, you know now. And I feel like it just sums up everything so brilliantly and so perfectly. So we start with a bang. I quite like the aimlessness of it, right? That the critics don't like, because it feels true to the experience of people using that many drugs. Like, it's so many drugs, more drugs than I ever thought someone could consume without dying, right? And the only aim for those characters, it seems, is to do more drugs. So it's excessive, it's hedonistic, it's decadent, it's intense, and a mix of some truly brilliant performances, in my opinion, from our two leading men, and the camera work drags you along with them, right? There's one moment where Duke takes adrenochrome and he starts falling into his adrenochrome hole, and I felt it, right? The lighting, the acting, the camera techniques, it really does pull you along for the ride with them. The camera is almost always at a crooked angle, and it really overdoes the close-ups, which makes the whole thing feel so intense. And in some ways, it reminded me a little bit of Natural Born Killers, and the critics didn't like that either.
It's my first note. My first note is it's like Natural Born Killers in the way that it
is
feels.
A little bit. So what do you think of those things I just said, Josh? Do you agree?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the way it's shot and the way it's made. I think it feels frantic and manic, and the whole point is they're on this hedonistic weekend or couple of days, whatever it is, just doing drugs and drinking, right? And that drug-fueled mania definitely comes across in the way that it's shot, the way that it's edited. I do think the two leads in it are really, really good. I think Johnny Depp particularly is really, really good in this.
His physicality, his facial
and his voice,
the way he uses his hands, like everything. I feel like because he spent a lot of time studying Hunter S. Thompson to sort of get into the role, and I just think he's brilliant. I think he's phenomenal. I think it's a real career highlight from him, to be honest, in my humble opinion. John,
he is excellent in this, and it's not that when we did Ed Wood, that's one of my favorite performances of his, and they are very different films.
Indeed.
But that sort of grotesque, cartoony performance, Johnny Depp does really, really well. Except, as he's gotten older, he's become more known for like heavy makeup roles or, Pirates of the Caribbean, Alice in Wonderland, that sort of thing. But in this, he is in heavy makeup, but it's quite interesting that he's still doing those big, grotesque, cartoony performances. But he is really good at it, especially considering in both those films, he plays a real person.
Yeah, interesting.
Which I think is really interesting. So yes, it's a really good representation of that drug-fueled mania that they're obviously going on. I don't know. I'm very, very square. I've never done an illegal drug in my life, but I do. I completely get what the film is going for. I haven't read the book, but I've read around Gonzo journalism, and I know the whole idea of this stream of consciousness writing where it's just manic and it just comes spewing out of you as you do it, and it definitely comes across. So yeah. It's certainly like an experience in the way that it's shot. It's like being drunk, or it's like being on drugs, or how being on drugs is supposed to be. Yeah. So from that sense, really, really enjoyed it. Really, really enjoyed it.
Technically, really, really impressive, and I don't think anyone could argue that. Like you can see it on the screen, right? So obviously the film is heavily narrated by Duke, and the narration interacts with the action on screen, and we sometimes slip from this non-diegetic narration to diegetic narration, and this is where a lot of the comedy comes from, I feel. For me, it's possibly the best example I've seen of narration, and it feels really natural. So Depp manages to convince you that he isn't reading a script. Like when we think back to things like The Beach or Legend, the narration felt so scripted, and the actors sound like they're reading, right? But you don't feel that in this, I don't think, anyway. And sometimes his voice acts as a bridge between the past and the present, because we get a few flashbacks when he's telling us sort of how they got to where they are now, and where they rented their car from and so on. And I just thought they used it really, really well, and it was executed brilliantly.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think that the whole thing with narration is it's got to feel like it wasn't put on at the end. Like a lot of narration,
exactly.
like Legend, for example, or what was the other example you gave? Sorry,
The Beach.
The Beach.
At the beginning when he's doing his monologue.
It's like they get to the end and someone's gone.
Oh, this doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make any sense. Put some narration over it, and that's when you go. It's like someone's going, "I'm going to hold your hand and take you through the film because you're an idiot and you don't understand what's Whereas this, it's obviously based on the book, which is sort of like a stream of articles and diaries, and like it's a stream of consciousness journalism, isn't it? So that's what it feels like. It feels like they've taken the book and just gone, the script is the book, basically. So when he's talking to us as Duke, it feels like you say, I think that the word is authentic, isn't it? It feels like an authentic, someone is talking you through as you go, rather than a handhold of through the film.
Yeah, and it's you do need it a lot of the time as well, because the internal narration, like his internal voice, is more rational than
Yeah.
his external voice, and like, sometimes he's not even speaking at all because he's so unbelievably wasted on fucking adrenochrome
It's
and
not even
ether,
real.
all these mescaline, like all these
Yeah.
things that I don't even know about. Do you know what I
Mind-bending,
mean?
like proper like heavy doses of LSD and stuff,
Next
isn't it? And
level, cocaine, weed,
peyote or
drinking.
whatever it is. Yeah,
Yeah, he just
it
doesn't
the
stop.
narration reminded me a little bit of something like American Psycho.
Okay, yeah.
So because that's like a diary, isn't it? It's like takes you through his day and takes you through his thoughts. And I suppose it's more of an internal monologue than a narration. And I think this is definitely the way to do it.
Yeah, and I think when the character when the character is presenting themselves a certain way in that world, but that isn't their true selves, you need that. Like you say in American Psycho, like outwardly he's trying to be, a bit kind of normal and functioning and stuff. So then when we go into his mind, it's a completely different picture.
Yes, yeah.
And I feel like that was the same here, yeah.
Absolutely. So one thing I did notice about it was they did dark comedy really well. So did you still find bits of it funny? Because I hadn't seen it before, so obviously I was coming at it fresh. Do you still find bits of it funny? It's quite absurd, isn't it?
Certainly, yeah. But it's not laugh out loud funny, but
no.
it's like when we'd be sort of in Duke's head, but then he'd accidentally say something out loud, and then he's like, "Oh, did they hear me? Did I say that out loud?"
Yeah,
it's
really dark, isn't it? I think what it does really well is it does a thing that a lot of dark comedies do, which is you create these grotesque characters, and the comedy comes when those people come into contact with normal people. Because so if you look at, like, I know we've harped on about it before, but if, for example, if you look at It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the whole thing with that is those people are grotesque and horrible and narcissistic. That the comedy comes when they go outside and meet normal people, and the normal people are like, "What the fuck?" Like, and that's the only comparison I can think of. But that is how you do dark comedy, I think, really well, really well. Or something like like Curb Your Enthusiasm, or there's other really, really dark comedies, Peep Show, like those sorts of things where the characters are like, they're not normal. The way they are is not normal, but you accept it as a normality until they meet normal. And then it's like, oh God, actually, no, they're not normal. Oh my God, am I normal? Because I've aligned myself with these characters, sort of thing. So like there's bits, isn't there, where like he's covering like a rally, isn't he? Like a cross desert rally.
Race,
and he's just got a beer and he's just trying to stop the beer from spilling.
Yeah, it's got sand as well.
Yeah, and all that. And it's very, very grotesque. Or there's the bit like where Dr. Gonzo's sort of suggesting he wants to kill himself, throw this into the bath when this song peaks and I'll die. And he just throws a grapefruit at his head. And it's just a really weird, grotesque moment. But by doing those things, it brings you back down to earth and realigns you with your own self and what is acceptable. And that's why I think it works as a dark comedy. And I think it's easy to forget in places that it is a dark comedy, because I suppose it's kind of based on exaggerated real events, isn't it?
Really like the soundtrack. So obviously there's lots of Tom Jones, so I'm always going to like that.
Jefferson Airplane as well. Yeah, I know you like them.
All the classics, all the sort of drug taking songs that you associate with the 70s and stuff. So that was good, and there was a good soundtrack running throughout, I thought. And just a bit more about the way it looks. So obviously I've already touched on how impressed I am with the camera work. But you've also got like this brilliant, arid, dusty desert landscape with the bright and manic goings on of Vegas sort of alongside it. The costumes and the props are also really impressive. So not just when we're in the trips with Duke, but also his own getup. And I read that a lot of the props and the costume actually belong to Hunter S. Thompson, which, again, it's interesting to have that sort of authenticity in what could almost be described as a fantasy film. Like, so much of what you're seeing is a hallucination.
Yes, yeah. Like you say, I don't know loads about Hunter S. Thompson, but I know bits and bobs from reading about it over the years, and it does seem to capture him really well. And that is, like you say, down to the fact that they were actually friends. I don't know if they were friends before this, but I know they became friends.
Well, because there was a lot of issues kind of in the run up to filming where they'd hired, two actors to play the roles, but then they pulled out, and then they'd hired someone else. I think maybe like John Belushi or someone to be one of them, and then he passed away. So there was all this going on, and it sort of never quite took off. And then when Hunter S. Thompson met Johnny Depp, and I think saw his audition, he was like, it has to be him. No one else can do it as good as he can. And then Johnny Depp just took it really seriously and like studied his life, read his work, wore his clothes, used his cigarette holder, like all these things. And yeah, just interesting, like, I guess, yeah, just like this really authentic feel that I think really adds to it inside this absolute mania, this like this color, this frantic, this chaotic landscape. But yeah, I like it. Did you like it overall?
So I'm split really, right? So
right.
so as a film, I can appreciate how this is. I'm so torn on this film, right?
Okay, yeah.
The best way I can explain it is this: I can appreciate how this film is a really good representation of of the source material. It's well made, it's frantic, it's kinetic, it's colourful. The performances are really good. There's plenty in there that I like, but I'm not in a rush to watch it again.
Okay, well,
because I found it quite a tough watch. If I'm honest, but that doesn't mean it's a bad film. I don't think it's a bad film. Like, I can appreciate what it is, and I can appreciate the good bits of it. I found it quite a tough watch, but that's more to do with my own preferences when watching a film. Like, I struggled more with this than I did with Natural Born Killers, for example. But as I say, it doesn't mean it's not a well-made, good film, and it certainly seems to capture the source material. I mean, that's what I wanted to get to was, so you've read the book, so how good of representation of that is this?
So I think it is in the sense of how kind of chaotic and almost non-linear it feels. Like when I was reading it, it felt like it's not like a regular book with like a start, middle, and end almost. It was kind of like you felt the chaos in it, and even so, at some points I was like, oh, I don't really know where I'm at with this, but I feel like that's the point.
Well, that's it, and that's you've hit the nail on the head there. I suppose that's exactly what I mean. Is that, like, I'm not in a rush to watch it again. It might not necessarily be my kind of cup of tea, but I can still appreciate it that it's good. I can appreciate that what it is and what it achieves as a film, and it definitely does do that. And there was stuff I did like. So I suppose that leads us on then to things that we perhaps didn't like. Now, again, I don't want you to think I didn't like the film. I'm quite split on it. It was a difficult one for me to get across what I mean, because I know that it definitely does the right thing, and I can really appreciate what I did like about it. There was just a few bits I was like, I'm not bothered on this, or that doesn't appeal to me. For you, is there much that you don't like?
So no, not really. Like, there's not anything that I don't like, and there is definitely not anything that I would change. But there are some points that I can obviously identify as to why other people may not like it and why the critics didn't like it, right? So as I touched on, like, I do understand and somewhat agree with the critics that there is a lack of character development and it feels a bit aimless, but that doesn't ruin it for me. And I think you just have to embrace it and absorb it for what it is, which is a cinematic wild ride, right?
Yeah.
There's no heart to the film. Like I said, there's no character development, so our protagonists aren't great people and not completely likable, so it's hard to establish an emotional connection with them. Like, even in Natural Born Killers, there were some tender human moments between Mickey and Mallory.
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything like that in this. So not much really happens either. It is more about the cinematic technique and the style. So if you're looking for those killer narrative hooks, then they're not there. And without the narration, the whole thing would fall apart. So it is relying heavily on the narration. There was the odd occasion where I don't think I was 100% clear on what was going on as well, but I had a feeling that that's intentional due to the subject matter being explored, which is mostly obviously excessive drug use. But that's kind of it from me. It's just kind of observations, I suppose, and understandings of why people wouldn't like it, but I do like it, and those things don't bother me at all.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think you have to understand what it is going into this. And so that raises 2 points. One, I suppose the point is if you're seeing this without the prior knowledge of what gonzo journalism is and what Hunter S. Thompson was about, would you get the most out of it? And I think my answer might be no. And I can understand how if you went into this and had no knowledge of that, you might go, what is this? So I get that. But if you know that beforehand, then I think you'll enjoy it. So maybe when you first watched it, did you have that prior knowledge?
No, so I watched it before I read it.
Yeah.
So I watched it, read it, and then watched it again. But I still really enjoyed it
Yeah.
that first time. Like I quite, like I said, with Natural Born Killers is one of my favorite films, and I don't mind a bit of mania. I don't mind a bit of chaos. Like it's just something different, isn't it? It's like, oh yeah, here's a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and the characters live happily ever after. Hooray! Like I like something that's a bit darker. I like something that's going to make you maybe ask questions and stuff.
And I think it's down to your preference, isn't it? So I know before I've talked about things like I have to like my characters and I like my films to have heart, and I sound like a bit of a soppy square, right? But that doesn't mean I can't enjoy a film if the characters aren't all lovely people. There's plenty of like films like that I love, Tarantino films, for example, that the characters are horrible, right? Or there's other films where the characters are horrible. I've just mentioned one of my favorite sitcoms, It's Always Sunny. The characters are horrible.
They're awful.
Yeah, I'm not going into this like, God, if I don't like these drug taking lunatics, then I'm out. I think my point is it's perhaps a bit too much of it. So I think that it's a bit too mad at times. It's a bit too hard to follow at times. It's a bit more repetitive. So I think perhaps we need a little bit, not loads, just a little bit more exposition at the start, so that we can embrace the madness. Like just a little bit, not loads, just a couple more lines of dialogue, because it's so frantic from start to finish that I think if you put something in there at the beginning, it was like, look, this is what's going on, this is where we're going, then maybe you might be able to embrace the actions of the characters a little bit more. So I think that was a little bit difficult for me, was then when it became their behavior. So their behavior was a bit of an issue, not an issue for me. That sounds like such a square. What I mean is they go over the line a little bit in terms of the behaviors of what they're doing. So like there are bits where they're just on a manic drug binge, right? And they're sort of just the only thing they're doing harm to is themselves. But because it became so escalating and because it became so repetitive, I got to the point where I started to find them irritating. So I started to get to the stage where you're just wreaking havoc, and there's an element where I'm like, okay, you're taking drugs, you're going around Vegas, and you're causing havoc. Big whoop. Why should I care? Do you know what I mean? I couldn't really connect with the characters, and then some of their actions, like they just threaten a waitress. So that made me go, well, I don't like you. Like you're a horrible person, and they seem to also groom a young girl. Christina Ricci's character, which
Christina
again,
Ricci, I forgot was in there.
So there's elements where it's like they go too far. They go to a point where I go, I can't align myself with you as a character, because it's being chaotic is one thing, but threatening a waitress and grooming a young girl is another thing. So I found it a little bit hard at times, I think, to fully embrace the chaos. But that might just be my personal preference. As I say, I can completely understand why it's a well-made film and why it's a good representation of the source material. I just wouldn't be in a rush to watch it again. And do you know what I mean? So I do think it was a well-made film. I just had issues with, I suppose, the general subject matter. It just a bit of a just disconnects me with the characters a little bit. I couldn't quite connect with them, and I think if we'd have seen slightly less of some of their actions and slightly more of their background, maybe I would have been able to. But then that is not what this film is. So if that is what I want, I wouldn't watch this film, would I?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's very much about the here and now. Like you don't get any backstory about Duke. Like you don't see, because again, and I know I keep coming back to it, but it is the best comparison as far as I'm concerned. Natural Born Killers, you see Mickey and Mallory's past.
Yes.
You see what they've been through, and therefore you can understand how they've come to the conclusion of, I just want to kill loads of people, steal loads of shit, and I don't give a fuck about anyone but me, sort of thing. You can see that journey because of what they've been through. Whereas with these two, you don't see that. You don't see their childhood. You don't see these traumatic things that, like, why is someone doing that many drugs?
Exactly.
Why? Josh, honestly, what
and it's
has
just and I suppose that's a really good point, which is it just made me go, all you're doing is taking drugs and causing havoc. Why should I give a shit? Like, I hope you get arrested. Do you know what I mean? Like all you're doing is trashing hotel rooms and causing havoc. If they were just doing that to a point, I think the balance is a little bit off. So I suppose that's my point. Having said that, that's the whole point of gonzo journalism. That's the whole point of this film. So is it a good representation of that? Yeah, it's a fantastic representation of that. It's a well-made film. I suppose it's just not my particular cup of tea. That doesn't mean it's not good. So that's why I was so torn on it. Do you know what I mean? it is both good and not for me at the same time, and that's fine. So, we will move on to talking about the critical reception. After Alice has taken us on a journey. A drug-filled journey to Las Vegas.
Oh, maybe not quite as extreme.
Not as extreme.
Two other people who we may have mentioned previously.
But it is the triumphant return of Alice down the rabbit hole. Alice.
Indeed, it's been a while. It's been a while, but here we are.
Take it away.
So, how about we take a deep dive into the actor who played the server, who had the utter pleasure of dealing with Duke and Gonzo in the North Star Cafe, the place where you go if you get kicked out of Vegas. Imagine being that bad. I am, of course, talking about Ellen Barkin, whose breakthrough role in Hollywood was, funnily enough, in a film called Diner. Born in the Bronx in 1954 to immigrants from Siberia and the Russian-Polish border, her dream initially was to teach ancient history, but ended up diving into the world of acting, studying the craft for years before landing her first audition. She spread her talents across the world of film and theatre, for which she has a Tony Award. But not wanting to stop with acting, she started a production company called Applehead Pictures with her brother George and her then husband, multi-billionaire Ronald Perelman, who was once upon a time regarded as the wealthiest man in America. As for these days, she is still working with her latest film Outlaws, currently in post-production, in which she stars alongside Pierce Brosnan, with the production design for said film being headed up by a man called Joe Billington, who was the art director for Number 23, and the casting director, Mary Vernew, who was the casting director for Losers. Hey, mic drop. Look what I did there. And that was Alice down the rabbit hole. Whew.
That was certainly far down the rabbit hole. We ended up about
Meta, right?
50 episodes ago
word?
there. With
Meta,
some of the
yeah,
stuff.
that's we don't forget the number 23.
Ellen Barkin. And the only other thing I know about her from this film, because I read it on the IMDb trivia, is that she's wearing a big fake bum.
Is she?
Yeah,
I missed that bit.
In the diner scene. But anyway, thank you very much for taking us down the rabbit hole. So, let's crack on with the critical reception then. How do I think it did? This is so difficult because I think this probably did, from what I can tell from what you've said, quite poorly with the critics, but I know it's got a cult following. So I think it's probably got quite a high audience score, quite a low critic score, which probably balances out. So let's say a solid 6.5 if it balances out. What would I give it? I would probably give it. It's so difficult. As taking my opinion, like, it's so difficult. How is it as a film?
It's all right, Josh, won't shout at you.
How is it as a film and an interpretation of the original text? It seems to be pretty spot on. So in that sense, it's probably like an 8. I would probably give it, from like my own like reaction to the film, probably
like cinematic enjoyment.
Yeah, like a 6. So if we balance that out to a 7, let's say I give it a 7. Lay it on me.
Okay. So at the time of recording, it gets a 7.5 on IMDb. Then over on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience give it 89%. But then the critics give it 49%.
Right.
And when I saw that, I was genuinely surprised.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised by that.
Because of the cinematic brilliance of it. Like, because of the way it's shot, the effort, the lighting, all this stuff that I just feel like goes completely ignored. And the main criticism is, visually creative, but aimless, repetitive, and devoid of character development. I can't deny that those things are true, but it's not a story that requires character development.
No.
It isn't that sort of thing. And in my opinion, and as I feel a lot of the time with the critics, is they've just kind of watched it the wrong way. Like, not every film has to be the same, and not every film has to follow every formula. Like, how can you tell me 1 minute it's like, oh yeah, it doesn't follow the formula, and so I'm going to give it a bad rating, but then something like Vacation, they're like, oh, it follows the formula too closely, and now I hate
That's
it.
Isn't it? What do you want? How can it be?
What do you want? What do you want?
Can it be
Speed 2, 6%? What do you want?
How can it be formulaically non-formulaic?
Yeah, it's
an oxymoron.
As always, you know what I mean? Like, this is why we're here. We're here to stand up against the critics, to question them. And that is what we do. But for me, if you're taking the critics score, that is underrated for me, categorically. That audience score, probably a little bit high. I'm probably sitting with the IMDb score, so around that sort of 7 mark is where I think it belongs. But I'll come over to you for the deciding.
Well, I suppose ultimately, it boils down to, we average the score out, but is it critically underrated? What did I get? 49%?
49.
Yeah, for me, that's
fair, it was a financial failure.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it's a little bit underseen as
Perhaps
well.
it was underseen upon release, but it's sort of garnered a bit of a following, hasn't it, since it came out? But
it's definitely got cult status.
back to that 49%. I mean, I wouldn't, even if I went just solely on my emotional reactions to the film, I wouldn't say it was that bad. So yeah, you're not going into this for heart and character development. That's not the point. The point is purely maniacal hedonism. Do you know what I mean? That's what it is there to be.
I'm a fan of.
Yeah.
Go watch Bruce Almighty if that's what you want. Is heart
What
and
a double
development.
bill. So yes, for me, I agree. It is underrated.
Yeah.
So there we go, another one in the underrated vault, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I think there might be quite a few surprised people out there that is as lowly rated as we found out that it is.
I was surprised.
Yeah,
it was one of them where I was like, oh, there's no way. You know what? It was the same as with The Beach. Like, I was like, this probably isn't underrated. Oh, but I really want to do a Leonardo DiCaprio film, so let's have a look. And I was like, fucking hell, that's low.
Yeah.
And it's just, 49 is just lower than I would have thought, basically. I feel like it just ignores all the hard work and all the good things about it.
I'd love to know the balance of people who went into this film knowing what the whole deal was versus those who didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh, it's not Schindler's List, though, is it? Oh, it's not Shawshank Redemption.
It is definitely not Schindler's List or the Shawshank Redemption. That is safe to say. So we will be back next week with another film. Please do keep subscribed, keep listening. We very much appreciate it. Feel free to go and listen to old episodes. We like to think they're timeless. Who knows? We try not to, we try not to think about it really. And if you do get a second, please do give us a rating and review wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with us, email address is filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on all the social medias. If you search for Just Films and That on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, we're there. Give us a follow. We always try and put content out. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good. It is never.
It's always good.
It's always good.
Always good.
It's never drug fueled though. That is one thing we can.
That's what we're going with.
That is what we're going with. And we're also on the television, Alice, aren't we?
We are indeed. So every Friday evening from 6 p.m, you can find me and Josh talking about our favourite underrated and underseen films on the local TV network. So if you live in Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Liverpool, or the northeast of England, you can find us on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. Or if you've got Sky, you can find us on the new bumped up channel of 188 because they thought we were so good. They just loved Sky. Just loved hearing me and Josh talking about underrated films.
They did.
And there we are, bumped up 7 channels. Nice. So that's every Friday night from 6 p.m.
Yes, lots of ways to hear and see us. Please do get in touch, and thank you as ever for listening. It really does mean a lot. We'll be back next week to talk about another film. Until then, cheerio.
Bye.